What if the person you told to move to another seat was the one who owned the very airline you worked for, on an ordinary afternoon flight? The hum of boarding chatter and the soft thud of luggage overhead masked something far more dangerous than turbulence, an invisible current of judgment. It took only seconds, a single assumption, a quiet dismissal. And with it, the line between professionalism and prejudice was crossed. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply looked at her, the lead flight attendant, and chose silence over spectacle. But behind that stillness was a storm. Who was this man who refused to raise his voice, yet could ground an entire aircraft with a single decision? Why did the crew's radios light up with a code they were trained to fear? And what happened after the wheels touched down would change the airline forever. This isn't just a story about a seat on a plane. It's about dignity. It's about the cost of assuming someone doesn't belong. And it's about what happens when the wrong passenger turns out to be the right reckoning. If you're ready for the full story, hit like, share this video, and subscribe. Let's begin. The words came like a blade through silk, sharp, sudden. Sir, this section is reserved for business class passengers only. Either you take your assigned seat in economy, or I'll have security escort you off the plane. Is that clear? Rachel Meyer's voice wasn't raised, but it carried across the cabin like the crack of breaking glass. The reaction was immediate. A man in the second row slowly lowered his newspaper. A woman in a cream blazer pulled her designer tote a little closer to her lap. A couple in the aisle seat stopped mid-conversation. The air shifted like the pressure change before a storm, and every set of eyes found the same man. He was sitting quietly in 3A, tall, black, dressed in a navy sweater, dark jeans, and worn leather sneakers. Nothing flashy. No logo screaming wealth or power. He wasn't scrolling on his phone or speaking to anyone. Just sitting, one leg crossed, a small leather satchel under the seat in front of him. Adrian Cole didn't move, didn't even lift his chin. His gaze stayed forward, fixed somewhere beyond the aisle. His expression calm. Still, it wasn't the first time someone had tried to shrink him down in public. He knew this tone, knew the weight behind those words. The tone that wasn't just about rules. It was about sending a message. And that message wasn't for everyone, just for him. Rachel was standing in the aisle, hands clasped in front of her, lips pressed into something that might have been a smile, if not for the steel in her eyes. Her stance was deliberate, blocking the narrow aisle, positioning herself so that nearby passengers could hear every word. She had not lowered her voice. She had not asked him quietly, discreetly. She had chosen to make this public. Adrian turned his head slowly, not quickly enough to be confrontational, just enough to meet her eyes. "I have my boarding pass," he said, his voice low. Even. Rachel gave a slight tilt of her head, like she'd been expecting resistance. "Then perhaps you'd like to show it to me." No one spoke, but the silence wasn't empty. It was loaded, thick. Adrian reached into the satchel, pulled out the folded pass, and held it out. Rachel took it without a word. Her eyes scanned the print, pausing on his name. Then her gaze lifted back to him, the faintest crease in her forehead. "Interesting," she murmured. "Because you weren't on the upgrade list. We didn't see your name at check-in. Are you sure this isn't someone else's seat?" From across the aisle, a man with salt and pepper hair. Charles Benton let out a short, dry chuckle. "Some people always think they can sit wherever they want," he muttered, loud enough for those in the first few rows to hear. Rachel's mouth twitched. Not a smile. More like the satisfaction of finding backup in someone else's prejudice. Adrian kept his gaze on her. Not on Charles. This is my seat, he said. The ticket. The pass. All of it. Rachel glanced down again at the pass, then handed it back, but she didn't step aside. From behind her, another voice cut in softer. Younger. Rachel. I just checked the manifest. Maya Torres stood a few steps back in the aisle. She was in the same uniform, but her posture was less rigid, more tentative. He's in 3A. Full fare. No upgrade. She hesitated. Everything's clear. Rachel didn't turn toward Maya. She kept her eyes on Adrian, like she was still weighing him against her assumptions. Adrian slid the boarding pass back into the satchel. His fingers brushed the edge of the phone inside. The thought came and went. He let it sit there for another beat before deciding. He drew the phone out, unlocked it, and typed a short message. Blue signal. Gate 19. Immediate. He didn't look up as he sent it, didn't make a show of it. He just placed the phone on his thigh and waited. The silence stretched. Passengers shifted in their seats. Charles Benton leaned back with a smirk that made Adrian think of boardrooms, where the only black person in the room was expected to fetch coffee. The cabin door was still open. Boarding wasn't finished. Somewhere beyond that door, the wheels of something larger had already begun to turn. Rachel's lips parted, like she was about to speak again, but the moment was interrupted by a voice from further forward. Excuse me? It was an older woman, seated in 4B, leaning slightly into the aisle, gray hair pulled neatly into a bun, eyes sharp with the kind of authority only decades in a classroom could give. If the man says he's in the right seat, and your own staff confirms it, then why is he still being questioned? The ripple was small but noticeable. Rachel straightened. Ma'am, we have procedures. Yes. The woman cut in, and I'm sure those procedures don't include humiliating someone in front of a cabin full of strangers. A few people nodded, others kept their eyes down. Adrian turned slightly toward the woman, giving her a nod, not one of gratitude exactly, but of acknowledgement. Rachel's mouth opened, closed, then, as if on cue, a chime sounded from the forward galley, the kind of tone reserved for messages from the gate. Rachel turned sharply and stepped toward the front. Adrian sat back in his seat, fingers resting lightly on the phone. He wasn't smiling, wasn't angry, just watching. The test had begun. The sound of the boarding area was a blend of rolling suitcases, distant gate announcements, and the low murmur of passengers waiting for their zone to be called. Adrian Cole moved through it quietly. No entourage, no personal assistant trailing behind with a tablet. Just him, a navy sweater over a crisp white shirt, dark jeans that had seen more meetings than vacations, and a well-worn leather satchel slung across his shoulder. The Los Angeles to Chicago route was one of Aurora Jet Line's busiest, high visibility, heavy on business travelers, and a mix of frequent flyers who noticed details. Adrian had chosen this flight on purpose, not because he needed to be in Chicago today, though he would end up there, but because the last 6 months had been filled with something he could not ignore any longer. It began with a letter. An elderly black man, a retired high school principal, wrote in to say a flight attendant on a Houston run had treated him like an intruder in first class. Then an email came from a scholarship student, traveling on a ticket paid for by an academic grant, who was stopped by security before boarding because someone assumed a hoodie meant he didn't belong in the premium cabin. A mother traveling with her young son sent a complaint that she was told the nice seats up front were not for people like them. These messages had not gone through the usual channels. They had found their way to Adrian's desk, sometimes addressed to him directly, sometimes forwarded quietly by an employee who wanted him to see what the official reports left out. He had read every single one, not skimming, reading. And with each account, a pattern began to form. It wasn't the airline's policy. It wasn't written anywhere, but it was happening, quietly, consistently, in the air and on the ground. Adrian had built Aurora Jet Lines from the ground up, guiding it from a struggling regional carrier into a name that competed with the old giants. He had believed that leadership by example would shape the culture, that if he set the tone at the top, it would echo all the way down to the newest gate agent. He had underestimated how bias could survive in the spaces where no one was looking, so he made a decision. If he wanted the truth, he would have to see it himself. Not as the CEO, not as a face on an internal newsletter, but as just another passenger. That was why he was at Gate 19 that morning, boarding pass in hand, standing in line with travelers who didn't glance twice at him. No one took notice when the scanner beeped and the agent waved him through. No one saw the quiet calculation in his eyes as he stepped onto the jet bridge. Inside the aircraft, the light was soft, tinted by the morning sun pouring through the open windows. Adrian found his seat in 3A, business class, window, enough space to watch without being in the center of the action. He stowed the satchel, sat down, and took a slow breath. Across the aisle, a man in a tailored navy blazer. Charles Benton was already seated. The kind of posture that said he was used to people moving around him, not the other way around. Charles looked up as Adrian settled in, his eyes making a quick scan from Adrian's sweater to his sneakers, to the leather bag at his feet. Then he looked away, but the glance had left something behind. That silent verdict. Adrian opened his book, a paperback novel he had been meaning to read for months, but he didn't turn a page. He was listening, the shuffle of carry-ons being lifted into overhead bins, the tone of the flight attendants greeting some passengers by name while offering others a quick, clipped smile, the way Rachel Meyer's voice carried as she welcomed a man in a charcoal suit, leaning in just enough to make it personal. When she passed Adrian's brow, her stride faltered. It was subtle, but he caught it. The microsecond of pause, the narrowing of the eyes. No greeting, no offer of water or coffee, just a glance, and then she moved on. The cabin was still boarding when a group of passengers entered together, chatting over the seats. Maya Torres was helping one of them store a bag in the overhead compartment, her movements efficient, but her eyes scanning each seat she passed. She caught Adrian's gaze for just a second, then looked away, but there was no edge in her glance, just the kind of professional awareness of someone still learning to read a room. Adrian sat back, hands folded loosely in his lap. This was exactly what he had come for, the unscripted moments, the way people revealed themselves when they thought no one important was watching. 4 minutes later, the moment arrived. Rachel returned to his row, boarding pass in hand, and said she thought there might have been a mistake. Her voice was polite, but the politeness was stretched tight over something else. She asked for his pass again, and when he gave it, she studied it with a look that seemed less about verification and more about challenge. Then came the words loud enough for Charles to hear, loud enough for the woman 2 rows back to stop scrolling her phone. This section is for business class passengers only. Either you take your assigned seat in economy, or we'll have security escort you off the plane. The air shifted again, just like it always did in these moments. That mix of discomfort and curiosity. No one wanted to be part of it, but no one wanted to miss it either. Adrian didn't answer right away. He had learned that silence could be more powerful than the first word spoken. He studied her face, the slight tilt of her chin, the way her weight shifted to one leg. Then he reached for the boarding pass, took it back, and slid it into the satchel. From the seat beside him, Charles let out that short, humorless laugh. "Some people always think they can sit wherever they want," he said, his voice carrying just far enough. Maya appeared a moment later, manifest in hand. "Rachel, he's in 3A. Full fare. Everything's cleared." Rachel's jaw tightened. She didn't turn to look at Maya. She kept her focus on Adrian as though the confirmation hadn't been spoken. Adrian felt the phone in his pocket. There was no anger in the decision, only precision. He pulled it out, typed the message in less than 5 seconds, and sent it without hesitation. Blue signal. Gate 19. Immediate. Then he placed the phone face down on his thigh. The test was officially underway. Rachel's hand lingered on the back of the seat in front of Adrian, her fingers curling lightly around the headrest as if anchoring herself there. The cabin around them was still in motion, people shuffling bags into the overhead bins, a toddler's voice calling for his mother, the muted sound of boarding announcements seeping in from the jet bridge, but in their small corner of row 3, the world had narrowed. "I think there's been a mistake," she said again, though Maya's quiet confirmation a moment earlier had already erased that possibility. Her voice had that polished tone of customer service, but Adrian could hear the grit underneath, the kind that wasn't about procedure, but about position. He met her gaze without leaning back. "There's no mistake." Rachel's lips tightened just enough to be noticeable. She straightened, stepping half a pace back. But instead of moving on to another passenger, she raised her voice slightly. Not a shout, just enough to carry. "Sir, these seats are reserved for business-class passengers who have met specific criteria. If you're unable to present the correct documentation, we'll have to reassign you." A murmur fluttered through the row behind him. Someone coughed into their hand, the sound sharp in the sudden quiet. Charles Benton tilted his head toward the aisle as if he had just been given front-row seats to a private performance. Adrian slid the boarding pass back out of his satchel. "Documentation," he repeated, the word slow, deliberate. He handed it over without breaking eye contact. Rachel glanced down at it, her eyes tracing the printed name, then the seat number. She paused, long enough for the moment to stretch uncomfortably, before handing it back. "We didn't see you check in at the premium desk." "I used the general desk," Adrian said simply. "That's unusual for business-class passengers." She replied. "Maybe," he said, "but it's not against policy." The answer hung there between them. Rachel's nostrils flared just enough to betray that she didn't like the stalemate. Charles gave a short huff, shifting in his seat. Maya was still standing a few feet away, watching, her brow slightly furrowed. She had seen this pattern before in small ways: a glance, a tone, an unnecessary double-check, but never this openly. She hesitated, torn between the instinct to defer to a senior attendant and the pull of knowing something was off. "Rachel," Maya said quietly, "I've verified the manifest twice. He's listed in 3A. Full fare. No upgrade. It's correct." Rachel didn't acknowledge her. Instead, she shifted her stance, folding her arms. "Sir, the cabin is full today, and we need to ensure seats are allocated properly. If you'd prefer, I can escort you to the other section now to avoid further disruption." There it was, the choice offered like an act of generosity, when in reality it was an ultimatum. Adrian leaned back slightly, resting one elbow on the armrest. "I'm fine here." Something flickered in Rachel's eyes, a spark of irritation that she quickly smoothed over. She drew in a breath, but before she could speak again, Charles Benton decided the moment belonged to him. "Well, maybe next time people can just sit where they're supposed to instead of holding up the rest of us," he said, his voice pitched to reach more than just Adrian. He settled back with a satisfied look, the kind of expression that said he believed he had spoken for everyone. Adrian turned his head slowly toward him, not with anger, but with a cool, measuring calm. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The silence that followed made Charles shift in his seat. The older woman in 4B leaned forward slightly into the aisle. Her voice was steady, clear. "That's enough. He's in his seat. You're in yours. Let's not make this uglier than it already is." Rachel's jaw worked once before she glanced toward the front of the cabin. She murmured something into the small intercom clipped at her waist. A second later, the chime for the forward galley sounded. Adrian picked up his phone. The screen lit with a reply to the message he had sent minutes earlier. It was from Noah Spencer. "On my way." He set the phone back down, his face unchanged, but inside there was a steady tightening of focus. He had not planned for the confrontation to come this early in the boarding process, but perhaps it was better this way. The quicker the pressure revealed the cracks, the more authentic the responses. Maya stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know she was going to push it like that." "You checked the manifest," Adrian said. "That matters." She gave the faintest nod before moving toward the galley, leaving him with the quiet hum of conversations being conducted just low enough to avoid being called out. The aisle cleared as boarding neared completion. The cabin door remained open, the scent of airport air still drifting in. Rachel hadn't returned. Charles kept his gaze fixed on the seatback screen in front of him, though his fingers drummed against the armrest. Adrian reached into his satchel again, pulling out the leather notebook. He flipped it open to a clean page and began writing in small, precise handwriting, date, flight number, seat, interaction details, tone, exact wording, passenger reactions. He did not embellish. He didn't need to. The truth was sharp enough without polish. He had learned long ago that the real record of moments like this wasn't in the corporate report or the news headline. It was in the immediate recollection, before the edges dulled and the emotions settled. From the corner of his vision, he saw movement near the cabin door. A tall figure in a dark suit stepped onto the aircraft, flanked by two people in airport operations badges. Noah Spencer scanned the rows, his eyes finding Adrian immediately. He gave the slightest nod. Rachel appeared from the galley, her posture tightening when she saw Noah. She stepped toward him, speaking in low tones, but Noah only listened for a few seconds before glancing past her to Adrian. Adrian closed the notebook, slid it back into the satchel, and sat still, waiting for the moment to unfold. Noah moved down the aisle with the calm precision of someone used to stepping into tense rooms. His presence didn't come with fanfare, but it was unmistakable. The posture, the measured steps, the eyes that took in every detail without lingering too long on any one face. He paused beside Adrian's row, his tone even. "Mr. Cole." Adrian looked up from his seat, his expression unchanged. "Noah." Rachel straightened at the sound of his name being used so openly, a subtle flicker of realization crossing her features, but she recovered quickly, shifting her weight onto one foot and folding her arms. "Is there a problem here?" Noah asked. His voice pitched so the nearby passengers could hear, but without the edge of accusation. Rachel's response was immediate. We're simply ensuring all passengers are in their correct seats before departure. Mr. Cole's boarding pass didn't match our upgrade list. It wasn't an upgrade, Adrian said. Still seated. It was purchased. Full fare. Noah's eyes stayed on Rachel. And the manifest confirms this. Maya spoke from a few steps behind. Her voice steady but quiet. It does. I verified it twice. Rachel's jaw tightened. But she didn't argue. Her gaze darted to Charles Benton, as though seeking silent reinforcement. Charles leaned slightly forward, his voice carrying, "Some of us have been waiting to depart, and all this is slowing things down. Maybe if certain people just took the seat they were given, we could be in the air by now." The air seemed to hold still for a second. Conversation stopped. A few heads turned, eyes narrowing. Others looked down, pretending they hadn't heard. The unspoken question hovered. Would anyone challenge him? Adrian didn't answer right away. He turned his head toward Charles, meeting his eyes with a look that was calm but unyielding. "The seat I was given is this one." Charles smirked faintly, but it lacked conviction now. His fingers began their restless tapping again. Noah broke the moment. "Where's the captain?" Rachel hesitated, then spoke into her intercom. A few moments later, Captain Ethan Park emerged from the cockpit. He was composed, professional, the kind of demeanor passengers expect from someone responsible for their safety. He looked from Noah to Rachel, then to Adrian. "What's the issue?" he asked. Rachel kept her tone even. "Passenger in 3A appears to have a seat assignment discrepancy." Ethan looked at Adrian. "Do you have your ID?" Sir Adrian reached into the satchel and pulled out a simple black business card. No ornate logo, no gold lettering, just his name and title printed cleanly. He handed it to Ethan. The captain's eyes scanned the card. The pause was brief, but it was there. He looked back at Adrian, his voice shifting. "Mr. Cole, I see. I'd prefer we keep this quiet," Adrian said. "I've already sent word to corporate. Your role now is to keep the cabin calm until we decide next steps." Ethan nodded once. Understood. He glanced toward Rachel, then back at Noah. "I'll be in the cockpit if needed." He returned to the front without further comment. Rachel stood motionless, her expression unreadable. Adrian leaned back slightly. "We can finish boarding now." Noah gave a short nod, then stepped toward the galley, murmuring instructions to the operations staff. The cabin door remained open, the scent of jet fuel faint in the air. Outside, the late morning sun reflected off the tarmac. As the last passengers filed in, Linda Kowalski from row 4 leaned forward again, her voice warm but firm. "I want to thank you, sir, for handling this the way you have. That kind of treatment, it's not right. Not here. Not anywhere." Adrian turned his head to meet her eyes. "I appreciate you saying that." Her gaze held his for a moment longer before she sat back, folding her hands in her lap. Around them, a quiet shift began. A few passengers glanced at Adrian differently now. Not everyone understood the full picture, but the dynamic in the cabin had changed. Maya approached with a bottle of water. "Room temperature, right?" she asked. Adrian nodded. "Thank you." Charles shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his tie, glancing toward the window as if the view outside might offer him an escape from the weight in the air. His earlier confidence had thinned, replaced by a subtle unease. Rachel moved toward the galley, disappearing behind the curtain. The sound of the beverage cart being prepped masked whatever conversation was happening up front. Adrian took a sip of water, then set the bottle down. His mind was already moving ahead. This was no longer about one interaction. It was a thread pulled on a much larger fabric, and he could see the weave beginning to fray. His phone vibrated once. A message from Noah. Gate team is holding the door on your signal. Adrian glanced at the time. There was still room to let the scene breathe. He wasn't looking to humiliate anyone in the moment. He wanted the truth to settle in the air, visible to anyone paying attention. He closed his eyes briefly, not to rest, but to focus, to listen. The cabin had its own rhythm now. The low rustle of safety cards being adjusted in seat pockets, the click of a laptop case being opened, the faint, steady hum of the air system overhead. When he opened them again, Maya was moving down the aisle toward the rear, her expression thoughtful. She passed Charles without a glance, pausing briefly to check on a young couple with a baby. Noah returned to his seat in row 1, leaning back with his phone in hand. He didn't look at Adrian, but the connection was there, understood without words. Rachel remained in the galley, her silhouette faintly visible through the curtain. She hadn't re-entered the cabin since the captain's visit. Whether it was avoidance or strategy, Adrian didn't guess. Either way, the balance had shifted. A child's laughter rang out briefly from the back, a reminder that for most people on this plane, this was just another flight. But for those who had witnessed the exchange, the atmosphere was different now. It carried the weight of something that couldn't be unseen. Adrian reached for his notebook again, jotting down a single line beneath his earlier notes. Silence from some, support from few, everyone watching. He underlined the last 2 words. Then he closed the notebook, set it on the armrest, and folded his hands over it. The engines outside began their slow, distant whir as the pre-departure checks continued. The test wasn't over. It had only just begun. The chime from the forward galley sounded again, sharper this time, followed by the faint click of the cabin door's latch. A wave of cooler air drifted in as the door opened wider. Adrian didn't turn his head immediately. He could hear the change in the boarding rhythm. Someone was coming aboard who wasn't part of the regular flight crew. Footsteps crossed the threshold, firm and unhurried. Conversations tapered off, as if people sensed a shift before they saw it. Then Noah Spencer appeared at the front, flanked by 2 airport managers in navy blazers with the Aurora Jet Lines emblem stitched neatly on the breast pocket. Their ID badges caught the light as they moved. Noah's expression was controlled, but his eyes searched the cabin until they landed on Adrian. A slight nod passed between them, an acknowledgement without words. The managers paused just inside the door, standing slightly apart, their posture professional but watchful. Rachel emerged from the galley, her smile faint and fixed. "Mr. Spencer," she said, the tone somewhere between cordial and cautious. "We're just resolving a seating discrepancy." "That's so?" Noah asked. His gaze flicked toward Maya, who stood a few rows back. "Is the manifest in order?" "Yes," Maya said without hesitation. "Mr. Cole is in 3A. Full fare. Confirmed." Rachel's smile thinned. "We didn't see him check in at the premium desk." "That's not a requirement," Noah replied evenly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried, "What matters is the manifest. And from what I'm hearing, there's no discrepancy." Charles Benton shifted in his seat, perhaps sensing the current turning. His eyes darted between Noah and Adrian, his earlier confidence beginning to erode. Adrian finally spoke, his voice steady. "We can close the door and finish boarding now." Noah nodded, then turned to one of the managers. "Hold the door until I say otherwise. We're not rushing this." Rachel's eyes flickered, the first sign of unease breaking through her professional mask. "The passengers are expecting an on-time departure." They're also expecting to be treated with respect. Noah said, "One doesn't cancel out the other." The words landed heavier than the volume suggested. A quiet ripple passed through the rows. A man in 2B shifted forward slightly, as if considering whether to speak. He didn't, but the thought was visible. The captain's voice came over the intercom from the cockpit. "This is Captain Park. We're finalizing a brief matter before departure. Thank you for your patience." The line clicked off. Adrian leaned back, one arm resting lightly on the armrest. His demeanor hadn't changed since the first words Rachel spoke to him, but the atmosphere around him had. What had started as an isolated confrontation was now a cabin-wide awareness. People knew something had happened, even if they didn't understand the depth of it. Rachel turned back toward the galley. "I'll prepare for service," she said. Her voice clipped. She stepped away, the curtain swaying shut behind her. Maya lingered in the aisle for a moment longer. She glanced at Adrian, a small crease between her brows. "Would you like anything else before takeoff?" "Just the water," Adrian said. "Thank you." She nodded, then moved forward, passing Noah on her way to the galley. He gave her a brief nod of acknowledgement. Noah stepped closer to Adrian's seat. His voice dropped low enough that only Adrian could hear. "We can deplane you now. Private jet in 25 minutes. No questions asked." Adrian's eyes stayed on the book resting in his lap. "No." Noah hesitated. "This is already drawing attention." "That's the point," Adrian said. "I'm not here to avoid attention. I'm here to see who speaks up and who stays silent." Noah studied him for a second, then nodded. "Understood." From behind them, Linda Kowalski leaned forward again. "Mr. Cole," she said clearly, "I hope you know some of us noticed what happened, and it isn't right." Adrian turned slightly toward her. There was no smile, just a quiet acknowledgement in his eyes. "I do know. Thank you." A few other passengers glanced at Linda, then at Adrian. Most didn't speak, but their expressions were softer now, the earlier curiosity tempered by a hint of respect. Charles Benton cleared his throat as if he might say something, but when Adrian's gaze met his, the words never formed. He looked away, straightening his cufflink instead. The airport managers remained at the front, speaking in low tones near the open door. The boarding area beyond was quieter now, the rush of earlier replaced by a waiting stillness. Adrian rested his hand on the leather notebook in his lap. He could feel the grain of the cover under his palm, the familiar weight of it. There would be time later to record every detail. For now, he was content to let the scene breathe. Maya returned with a fresh bottle of water, setting it on the armrest with care. "Here you go." "Thank you," Adrian said again, meeting her eyes for a fraction longer this time. There was something there, not quite guilt, not quite relief, but the awareness of someone who had stepped toward the truth, even if only halfway at first. She moved on, checking overhead bins as she went. Rachel did not reappear. Noah took a seat in the front row, his phone in hand, tapping a message. Adrian's phone vibrated a moment later. Door still open. "You say when?" Adrian picked it up, considered the message, then placed the phone face down on the tray table. He wasn't ready yet. The cabin still held an uneasy energy, and he wanted it to settle just enough for people to feel the weight of the quiet. The hum of the engines remained faint. Somewhere outside, a luggage cart rattled past. Inside, the only movement was the occasional shifting of a passenger in their seat, the soft rustle of a page turning, the clink of a coffee cup in the galley. Adrian let his gaze drift toward the window. The sunlight had shifted, casting a warmer hue across the tarmac. A plane in the distance began to taxi, its engines flaring briefly before fading into the background. It was the kind of ordinary detail that most travelers would ignore. But to Adrian, it was grounding, a reminder that the world outside this narrow metal tube kept moving, indifferent to the drama inside. He closed his eyes briefly, not to retreat, but to center himself. The next steps would matter, not just for him, but for everyone watching, whether they realized they were watching or not. When he opened them, Noah was still at the front, speaking quietly to one of the managers. Maya was near the back, leaning toward a passenger in 18C with a gentle smile. Charles was staring straight ahead, jaw tight. Linda sat back in her seat, her hands folded, eyes forward, but alert. Adrian picked up his phone again, typed a single word, and sent it. Close. The managers at the door moved in unison, stepping back inside as the heavy cabin door swung shut with a final, solid thud. The hiss of the seal locking into place was almost imperceptible, but Adrian felt it like the closing of a chapter. The test was moving into its next phase. The heavy click of the cabin door sealing echoed faintly through the plane. It was a sound most passengers barely noticed, but to Adrian it marked a decision point. The outside world was now cut off. Whatever happened from here would unfold in front of the people seated in this narrow space, and that was exactly how he wanted it. Noah glanced back from his seat in the front row, phone in hand, eyebrows raised slightly as if asking the unspoken question. "Are you ready to end this now?" Adrian met his eyes briefly and then shifted his attention to the bottle of water resting on his armrest. He twisted the cap, took a slow sip, and set it back down without a word. Maya moved quietly down the aisle, checking on passengers, making sure overhead bins were latched. When she reached his row, she paused, her voice low enough that it was almost lost in the hum of the air vents. "If there's anything you need, just tell me." Adrian gave her a faint nod. "I will." From across the aisle, Linda Kowalski watched the exchange. Her hands were folded in her lap, but her eyes were sharp. She leaned toward the aisle just enough to be heard. "It matters that you're staying." Her words carried in a way she might not have intended. A man in row 2 turned his head slightly. A woman in row 5 stopped scrolling her phone. A few passengers who had been pretending not to listen now found themselves part of the moment. Adrian met Linda's gaze. Sometimes staying is the point. She gave a small, knowing smile and sat back. The cabin was settling now, but there was still a hum of tension beneath the surface. Charles Benton's leg bounced under his seat, his eyes flicking toward Adrian and then away again. Whatever satisfaction he had earlier seemed to have drained away, replaced by something harder to name. Maybe discomfort. Maybe the realization that his comment had not gone unnoticed. Rachel remained in the galley, out of sight. The curtain hung still, no movement behind it. She had not stepped into the aisle since the arrival of Noah and the airport managers. Whether it was a choice or an instruction, Adrian didn't know. He wasn't concerned with her absence for the moment. He was more interested in what the silence around her meant. Noah shifted in his seat, leaning into the aisle to catch Adrian's attention. "The crew is ready to push back. All you need to do is give the word." Adrian shook his head once. "Not yet." Noah hesitated, then leaned back. He knew better than to press. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be on our way shortly. Please ensure your seat belts are fastened. Standard, professional, calm." There was no trace of the earlier disruption in his tone, but Adrian could hear the subtle quickness in the delivery. The captain wanted to move forward. Maya returned to the front, passing Noah and stepping into the galley. Adrian caught the quick exchange of glances between her and Rachel, though he couldn't hear the words. A moment later, Maya reappeared, her expression neutral but her pace brisk. Linda broke the quiet again, her voice clear. "I taught high school for 35 years. You learn a lot about when to intervene and when to let things play out. But you also learn the danger of saying nothing." Adrian turned slightly toward her. "Silence is easy." She nodded. "Too easy. That's why people choose it." Her words seemed to settle into the air like fine dust. A younger man in row 4 looked down at his hands. A woman in row 6 glanced toward the front, her expression thoughtful. Charles shifted in his seat again, finally speaking in a voice softer than before. "Look, about earlier. I might have spoken out of turn." Adrian didn't look at him directly. "This isn't about me accepting an apology. It's about you asking yourself why you felt so comfortable saying it in the first place." The words landed without force, but with precision. Charles's mouth closed. He gave a small nod, looking toward the window as if the answer might be written on the wing. Maya returned to Adrian's row once more, this time carrying a folded blanket. "In case you need it," she said, placing it gently on the empty seat beside him. "Thank you," Adrian said. The words were simple, but his tone carried something more: acknowledgement, respect. In the front, Noah received a quiet update from one of the airport managers. They would remain on board until takeoff, observing. Adrian approved silently with a slight lift of his chin. The engines began to spool up, the vibration running lightly through the floor. The pushback tug locked into place beneath the nose gear. Outside, the sunlight had shifted to a deeper gold, stretching shadows across the tarmac. Adrian picked up his notebook and uncapped a pen. His handwriting was small and precise as he recorded what had transpired so far. The initial confrontation, the passenger remark, the arrival of Noah, the absence of the lead flight attendant from the cabin, the way silence spread like water, finding every low space. He paused mid-sentence, looking around the cabin. Some passengers avoided his gaze. Others met it briefly before looking away. A few, like Linda, held it without flinching. Each reaction told him something. Each was a data point in a larger map he was building in his mind. He finished the line in his notebook. "Staying is the only way to see the whole picture." The tug began to pull the aircraft backward from the gate. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. A flight attendant's voice began the safety demonstration, clear and rehearsed. Maya was at the front, her voice steady as she explained the seatbelt function. Rachel remained unseen. Adrian watched the demonstration without really focusing on the words. His attention was on the way Maya carried herself now, compared to earlier. There was a subtle shift, more presence, more certainty. She caught his eye briefly at the end of the demo, and he gave her a nod, not a smile, not encouragement exactly, but recognition. As the plane began to taxi, the vibrations underfoot smoothed out. The murmurs of passengers resumed in low tones. The disruption was over on the surface, but Adrian knew the real work was only beginning. He would carry this moment into meetings, into policies, into training programs. But for now, he wanted it to live here, in this cabin, in the minds of the people who had seen it firsthand. The engines roared slightly as the plane turned toward the runway. Adrian closed his notebook and placed it back into the satchel. His hands rested loosely on the armrests, his posture relaxed, but his mind alert. The choice to stay had already begun to change the temperature of the cabin. He could feel it in the way people glanced at him, in the quiet respect from some, and the restless discomfort from others. As the plane began its takeoff roll, He glanced once more at Linda. She met his eyes and gave a single, deliberate nod. He returned it. Sometimes staying was the lesson. The plane leveled out, the roar of the engine softening into the steady hum of cruise. Overhead bins clicked faintly as the cabin settled into its airborne rhythm. A few passengers pulled out laptops. Others tilted their seats back just enough to close their eyes. To an outsider, it might have looked like any other flight, but Adrian knew this wasn't just any flight. He leaned back in 3A, watching the aisle in quiet study. The confrontation from earlier still lingered in the air like a faint scent. It wasn't sharp anymore, but it was present. He could feel it in the way certain passengers shifted when they passed his row, the way others deliberately avoided looking at him. The silence was no longer just a byproduct of boarding. It had a shape now. It was intentional. Silence, he thought, was the most reliable companion of bias. It slid in where courage should be. It offered comfort to the person who didn't want to get involved, even when they knew something was wrong. He'd seen it in boardrooms, in negotiations, in family gatherings, and here it was again, 35,000 feet in the air. He opened his notebook, flipping back to the page he'd started before takeoff. He wrote a single sentence. Silence has weight. It presses on the person it isolates, and it cushions the person who stays quiet. He tapped the pen against the margin, letting the thought sit there for a moment. From the row behind, a low voice spoke. "Sir, if you don't mind me saying, that was wrong. What happened earlier?" Adrian turned slightly. A man in his 40s, wearing a blue button-down shirt and wire-rimmed glasses, leaned forward. His voice was quiet, almost apologetic. "I didn't say anything at the time," the man admitted. "I should have. I guess I didn't want to make it worse." Adrian studied him for a second. Worse for who the man blinked. I'm not sure. That's worth thinking about," Adrian said. The man nodded, retreating back into his seat. His words, hesitant as they were, stood out to Adrian because they were rare. People often explained their silence afterward, as if an explanation could balance the choice. But the imbalance stayed. Maya passed by with the beverage cart. She paused at Adrian's row. "Coffee, tea." "Just water," he said. As she poured, her voice dropped just enough for him to hear. "I wanted to say I'm sorry again. I didn't speak up right away." "You spoke up eventually," Adrian replied. "And you checked the manifest. That's more than most." Her expression softened, though her hands remained steady on the cup. Still, it should have been faster. Adrian took the water. We all have moments where we hesitate. What matters is whether we move forward after that. She gave a slight nod before pushing the cart onward. The conversation was brief, but it added another note to the picture Adrian was piecing together. Maya had felt the hesitation, recognized it, and acted despite it. That was the kind of shift he wanted to see multiplied across the airline. Charles Benton remained in his seat, unusually quiet. His earlier smirk was gone. He had glanced at Adrian a few times since takeoff, but never long enough to make eye contact. It wasn't remorse exactly, but something closer to unease. Charles was used to speaking without consequence. Today had disrupted that pattern. Adrian returned to his notebook, writing in a steady hand. Passenger comments, one supportive, one self-critical, several silent. Crew, one confrontational, one corrective. Leadership presence altered cabin behavior. He underlined the last line twice. Linda Kowalski stirred in her seat, leaning forward into the aisle. "You're writing it all down, aren't you, I am?" Adrian said. Good, she replied. Memories fade. And when they do, people start rewriting the story. She was right. That was how denial took root in the slow erosion of details. That was why he always wrote things down while they were still fresh, before time could smooth over the rough edges. The hum of the engines filled the pause. Outside the window, clouds stretched in long, pale lines across a blue so deep it almost looked painted. Adrian watched them for a moment. The view was calming, but it also reminded him how enclosed the cabin was. A metal shell hurtling through the sky, carrying its own ecosystem of behaviors, hierarchies, and unspoken rules. He thought about the employees who had sent him quiet warnings over the past 6 months. Some had described their own experiences. Others had relayed what they'd seen happen to passengers. Many had asked not to be named. They feared retaliation, even in a company whose CEO publicly spoke about fairness. Adrian knew that fear wasn't irrational. Culture was shaped by what leaders tolerated in silence, not just what they declared in meetings. If people saw bias go unchecked, they assumed it was acceptable. That was why this flight mattered so much. Maya reappeared near the front, speaking with Noah in low tones. Adrian could read Noah's body language from here. He was listening, weighing options, scanning the cabin in short, deliberate glances. The airport managers had taken seats in the jump seats near the front, watching quietly. Rachel was still absent from the main cabin. The curtain to the galley hung unmoving. Her absence spoke almost as loudly as her earlier confrontation. To Adrian, it was a sign of someone withdrawing, either out of discomfort or defiance. The man in 2B stood to stretch, catching Adrian's eye for a second before looking away. His hesitation was brief, but telling. Adrian had seen that look countless times before, the look of someone who knew they'd witnessed something wrong, but had chosen the safety of neutrality. He wrote another note in the margin. Neutrality is rarely neutral. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Passengers began moving around, heading for the lavatories, stretching their legs. The hum of conversation rose slightly. Yet Adrian could feel that certain topics remained off-limits among strangers. No one wanted to be the one to bring up what had happened. That reluctance was exactly what he had come to study. Linda leaned forward again, her voice quieter now. Most people think courage is about big gestures, but sometimes it's just saying the first word. Adrian looked at her, and the cost of not saying it. Her eyes met his without flinching. It becomes the norm. He considered that for a moment, then nodded. Maya returned with a trash bag, collecting cups and napkins. When she reached Adrian's row, she didn't move on right away. I've been with the airline for 8 months, she said softly. I've seen moments, smaller than this, easier to dismiss. But they add up. They always do. Adrian said. She dropped the cup into the bag, gave him a short nod, and moved on. Adrian closed the notebook for now. He rested his hands on it, letting the cabin noise wash over him. The weight of the silence earlier was still here, layered under the routine hum of flight. He would remember it. He would make sure others remembered too. The real test was not whether people noticed injustice when it was loud. It was whether they noticed when it was quiet. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the midday sun outside shifted behind a stretch of cloud. Adrian sat back in his seat, fingers resting lightly on the cover of his notebook, but his mind was turning. He had seen enough to understand that this was no isolated incident. Still, there was another conversation that needed to happen before the plane touched down in Chicago. He pressed the small call button on his armrest. A soft chime sounded, and moments later, Maya appeared beside him. "Yes, Mr. Cole, I'd like a word with the captain," Adrian said, his voice low but steady. "Just 5 minutes in private. When it's convenient for him." Maya hesitated, her eyes searching his. "Of course. I'll ask." She moved toward the front, disappearing through the galley curtain. A moment later, the cockpit door opened and Captain Ethan Park stepped out. He glanced down the aisle before making his way toward Adrian's row. "Mr. Cole," the captain said, his tone professional, even respectful. "We can speak in the forward galley if that works for you." Adrian rose from his seat. The aisle seemed narrower than usual, but he walked it without hurry. A few passengers followed him with their eyes, curious. He didn't acknowledge them. In the galley, the door to the cockpit was closed again, leaving just enough space for the two men to stand without being overheard. Ethan clasped his hands behind his back. "Sir, I want to start by saying I'm sorry for what happened earlier." The captain said, "I should have handled it differently the moment I stepped into the cabin." Adrian studied him for a moment. "Captain, I'm not here for apologies. I've had a lifetime of them. I'm here for clarity." Ethan nodded slowly. "You have it, sir. It won't happen again." "That's not good enough," Adrian replied gently but firmly. "Because what happened to me today happens to people who don't sit in my chair, people who don't have my title. The problem isn't just one bad moment. It's a pattern. And if it's happening here, it's happening elsewhere." The captain's jaw tightened. "I understand. Do you?" Adrian asked. The question wasn't sharp, but it hung in the air with weight. Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "I think I do now." Adrian leaned slightly against the galley counter, folding his arms. "Here's what's going to happen. When we land, you'll file a full incident report, not just on passenger conduct, but on crew judgment. I want a complete timeline, every decision, every statement, names included if needed. This will go directly to the audit team." "Understood," Ethan said. "And Captain," Adrian added, his voice steady, "don't protect anyone out of loyalty. Loyalty without accountability is just cover." Ethan's expression shifted, the meaning sinking in. "Yes, sir." Adrian extended his hand. The captain shook it firmly, respectfully. Then Adrian stepped back into the aisle, heading for his seat. As he passed, Maya moved aside, offering him the faintest smile. "Is everything all right, sir?" she asked. "It will be," Adrian said. He returned to 3A, sliding back into his seat. The hum of the engines filled the quiet. Passengers glanced his way again, sensing that something was happening, even if they couldn't name it. Adrian didn't mind. Let them wonder. He reached into his satchel and pulled out his notebook once more. The pen moved across the page in precise strokes. Flight 227, LA to Chicago. Incident 1 lead. FA challenges seat assignment based on appearance. Follow-up passenger comments. Mix of silence and mild support. Action captain instructed to file full report to audit team. Beneath it, he began a new section. Immediate action items. 1. Full internal audit of crew conduct over past 90 days. 2. Emergency ethics and equity retraining for all frontline staff. 3. Launch Speak Freely. Anonymous hotline for reporting bias or mistreatment. 4. Public apology to affected passengers. Clear, not buried in PR jargon. 5. Suspend lead flight attendant pending internal review. 6. Promote staff who showed integrity under pressure. Maya Torres noted. 7. Internal memo. Silence is complicity. He paused, tapping the pen against the page. The words were more than a list. They were the blueprint for what would happen next. From across the aisle, Linda Kowalski leaned forward again. "I just want to say thank you," she said quietly. Not everyone would have stayed so composed. Adrian looked at her. Sometimes dignity is the loudest thing in the room. She smiled faintly. "You taught us something today." "I didn't come here to teach," Adrian said. "I came here to see who we really are, and we've got work to do." Her expression softened. "Then I hope you succeed." The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, a brief shudder through the cabin. Adrian's hand stayed steady on the notebook. He glanced toward the galley. Rachel was still out of sight. He didn't need to see her to know she was aware of the shift in power. Maya passed again, checking seat belts. She paused at Adrian's row. "We should be descending in about an hour." He nodded. "Thank you." Maya, she moved on, her presence calm and measured. Adrian appreciated that. Not every act of integrity came with a speech. Sometimes it was in the quiet return to doing the job right. The hum of conversation around him rose slightly as drink orders were taken. A man in row 2 leaned toward his seatmate, whispering something while glancing back at Adrian. He didn't catch the words, but the look was familiar curiosity mixed with a slow realization. Adrian closed the notebook, setting it on the tray table. He allowed himself a moment to breathe, watching the clouds drift by outside the window. He knew that once the wheels touched down, the pace would quicken. There would be calls, meetings, statements. But here, in this suspended space between departure and arrival, he could see the whole picture clearly. The silence earlier had been telling. The hesitation from some, the quiet courage from others, the attempt at authority from Rachel, the reflexive prejudice from Charles, the balancing act from the captain. All of it painted a portrait of a culture that needed reshaping. Adrian reached for his water, taking another slow sip. He thought about the employees who would hear about this flight long before the official report was filed. Stories traveled fast inside an airline. He wanted this one to carry the right message, not fear, not gossip, but a reminder that leadership paid attention. The engines hummed steadily beneath them. The path to Chicago stretched out ahead. Adrian rested his hand lightly on the notebook, the weight of it grounding him. He had come here to observe, but observation had shifted into action. In the galley, the curtain rustled briefly. Rachel's silhouette appeared for just a second before disappearing again. Adrian didn't follow her movement. There was no need. The moment for her to speak had passed. What came next would be handled elsewhere, in spaces where accountability was written in policy, not just in glances. He glanced at his watch. Time was moving quickly now. The next phase of this test was approaching. The captain's voice came over the intercom, smooth and measured. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent into Chicago. Please return to your seats and ensure your seat belts are fastened." A soft chime followed, and the cabin shifted. Overhead bins rattled slightly as passengers tucked away their belongings. The steady rhythm of the engines deepened into a quieter hum. Adrian straightened in 3A, setting his water bottle back on the tray table. The change in altitude always had a way of sharpening his thoughts. He opened his notebook again, scanning the notes from the past 2 hours. Every word, every observation, every small interaction was laid out in clean, deliberate handwriting. He added a new line, "Final phase. Follow-through begins on landing." Noah appeared in the aisle, stopping briefly at Adrian's seat. "We've arranged for a private car when we land. The airport managers will accompany us to the executive lounge before we depart for the downtown office. Adrian nodded. Good. I want the initial meeting with them on record. 20 minutes max before we move to the full debrief. Understood, Noah said. His tone carried both respect and readiness. Linda Kowalski leaned forward from her seat, her eyes calm but curious. Does this mean there will be consequences? Adrian looked at her for a moment, the hum of the cabin filling the pause. It means there will be accountability. Real, visible accountability. She gave a small, satisfied nod. That's all I needed to hear. The seatbelt sign glowed steadily overhead. Maya began her final walkthrough, checking seat backs and tray tables. When she reached Adrian's row, she spoke in that low, deliberate tone she had used before. When this goes to corporate, I just want you to know, I'll tell them everything exactly as it happened. I know you will, Adrian replied. She gave a small smile before moving on. That quiet reassurance mattered. It meant that the record would not just be his version. It would come from someone who had been in the middle of it, who had made a choice to correct a wrong. Outside, the wing tilted slightly as the plane adjusted its path. Through the oval window, the edges of the city began to appear faint gray outlines against the horizon, sharp under the fading sunlight. Charles Benton had been silent since their earlier exchange. Now he shifted in his seat, clearing his throat. Mr. Cole, I realize I may have embarrassed myself back there. Adrian didn't turn to look at him. This isn't about me. It's about the culture we tolerate. What you choose to do after this flight, that's what matters. Charles let the words settle. He didn't reply, but his posture shifted just slightly, as if the weight of the conversation had landed. The captain's voice returned, noting the weather in Chicago and the expected arrival time. His tone was steady, but Adrian knew Captain Park would be thinking about the incident long after this flight. He had given him clear instructions, a full report, no omissions. That was non-negotiable. The cabin tilted again, the skyline now coming into clearer view. Sunlight caught the glass of high-rise buildings, sending glints of gold into the air. Adrian closed his notebook and placed it in his satchel, snapping the clasp shut. He took a slow breath. Soon they would be on the ground, and the next phase would begin. Meetings, statements, quiet but deliberate restructuring of procedure. There would be no memo filed and forgotten this time. Noah leaned toward him from across the aisle. I've already set up a secure line for your call with the board this evening. They're expecting you to outline your findings from this flight. Good, Adrian said. They won't just be hearing a story. They'll be hearing a plan. A light bump of turbulence made a few passengers grip their armrests. Maya's voice carried gently over the intercom, reminding everyone to remain seated. Her presence had grown steadier as the flight went on. Adrian could see it in the way she stood, the way she projected her voice. She was a reminder that leadership could happen from any seat, in any role. Linda spoke again, her tone quieter now. You know, a lot of people would have just taken the seat they were given and avoided the trouble. You didn't. Adrian looked at her. If you accept disrespect quietly, you invite it loudly the next time. That's not how change happens. She considered that, her lips pressing together in thought. That should be written somewhere. People can't ignore it. The wing dipped as the plane turned toward the runway. The city filled the window now, streets and rooftops visible in the fading light. Adrian felt the subtle shift in the cabin passengers preparing themselves for the end of the flight, for the return to their own worlds. But for him, the real work was just beginning. Rachel had still not returned to the aisle. Adrian wondered briefly if she planned to remain hidden until the very last moment, It wouldn't change anything. Her absence was part of the record now. The landing gear deployed with a low rumble beneath them. A few heads lifted, eyes shifting toward the windows. Adrian stayed composed, his attention on the present moment, in his mind. The first post-landing meeting was already taking shape. Noah would handle the logistics. The airport managers would provide initial statements. Captain Park's report would arrive before midnight. By morning, the audit team would have their marching orders. The plane touched down smoothly, the roar of the engines rising as the reverse thrust engaged. Adrian felt the familiar deceleration, the shift of weight forward. The wheels hummed against the runway. As they taxied toward the gate, Maya moved quietly to her jump seat. Adrian caught her eye one last time before the door opened. She didn't speak, but the look was clear. She knew what had happened. Here mattered. The seatbelt sign switched off. Passengers rose, pulling bags from the overhead bins. The noise of zippers and shifting luggage filled the cabin. Adrian stayed seated, letting the crowd thin. He had no rush to leave. This wasn't about being first through the door. It was about leaving last, making sure everything that needed to be observed had been. When most of the cabin had cleared, he rose, collecting his satchel. Noah was waiting near the front. The two airport managers stood by the door, ready to escort them to the lounge. Adrian stepped into the jet bridge, the cool air rushing in from the terminal. Behind him, the plane stood still, a sealed chapter in a larger story. Ahead of him, the real work awaited. The executive lounge at O'Hare had been cleared for privacy before Adrian even stepped inside. The glass walls that usually offered a view of the terminal were covered with soft gray blinds, and the usual hum of travelers was replaced by a low, expectant quiet. Noah walked ahead, holding the door for him. The two airport managers followed closely, their expressions a mix of professionalism and unease. They knew this meeting wasn't just a formality. Adrian set his satchel on the table at the center of the room, unzipping it with deliberate calm. He took out his notebook and placed it in front of him, flipping to the most recent page. His pen was already in hand. "Let's begin," he said. The managers exchanged a glance before taking their seats. Noah remained standing at the side, his presence both a signal of support and a quiet warning that this conversation would be documented in full. Adrian's voice was even, but there was no mistaking the edge of purpose in it. "I want a complete account of the incident, from the moment I stepped on the aircraft to the moment we arrived at the gate here in Chicago. Start with what you were told before I boarded." The older of the two managers, a woman with sharp eyes and a pressed navy suit, cleared her throat. "Sir, we were not given any prior information about your presence on the flight. We only received a call from the flight crew once the confrontation began, from whom Adrian asked, "Lead flight attendant Rachel Meyer." She replied. She reported a seating dispute and requested our intervention upon landing. Adrian wrote the name down again, underlining it once. Did she mention the nature of the dispute? No, sir, she did not. Adrian's pen moved slowly, recording the omission. So at no point did she disclose that the passenger in question was the CEO and majority shareholder of this airline. "No, sir," the woman said again. Noah's gaze was fixed on them, his expression unreadable. Adrian turned to the second manager, a younger man who looked as though he had rehearsed his answers. "And when you boarded the plane here in Chicago, what did you observe?" He shifted slightly in his seat. The cabin was calm. The passengers were seated. The crew appeared professional. Adrian studied him for a moment. Appeared. That's an interesting word. The younger man hesitated. "It's the word I'd use. Sir, I didn't see open conflict, but I did sense tension. Tension between who? Between you and the lead flight attendant. Adrian leaned back slightly, letting the silence stretch just enough for the weight of the words to settle. Then he spoke again. That tension existed because the lead flight attendant made a judgment based not on a seating manifest, but on my appearance. She assumed I did not belong in my assigned seat. That is not a seating error. That is bias. And bias, left unchecked, becomes culture. Neither manager spoke. Noah stepped forward. We're going to need both of you to prepare statements tonight. They will be signed, dated, and submitted to the corporate audit team by morning. The statements should include every detail you can recall, including body language, tone, and any passenger comments you overheard. The older manager nodded quickly. The younger man followed suit, his earlier stiffness giving way to compliance. Adrian closed his notebook for a moment, resting his palm on the cover. I don't expect perfection from my crews. I expect accountability. If we can't face the truth in here, then we have no business flying anyone anywhere. The room was still beyond the blinds. The muted sound of rolling luggage and distant announcements reminded them of the constant movement outside these walls. But here, time felt slowed, compressed into the urgency of the moment. Captain Park will be submitting his report as well. Adrian continued, It will be cross-referenced with your statements and the passenger manifest. If there are discrepancies, they will be addressed directly. The managers nodded again. Noah glanced at his phone, then looked to Adrian. Rachel Meyer has been asked to remain on the aircraft until we finish here. Do you want to speak with her tonight? Adrian considered it for a moment. No, not until the initial reports are in. Right now. I want facts without the distortion of defense. That answer seemed to surprise the younger manager, but he didn't speak. Adrian reopened his notebook, flipping to a clean page. His handwriting was crisp, each letter formed with care. Immediate next steps. 1. Incident reports from all staff and managers by 9:00. 2. Passenger statements requested from volunteers via follow-up email. 3. Internal review of Rachel Meyer's conduct over the last 12 months. 4. Ethics retraining mandatory for all cabin crew within 30 days. 5. Recognition and promotion review for staff who demonstrated corrective action during incident note Maya Torres. He set the pen down. That's all for now. We'll reconvene in 2 days once the audit team has had time to review. Until then, treat this matter as confidential. If it leaks before we're ready, it will compromise our ability to address it fully. The managers rose, gathering their folders. They left quietly, the door closing behind them. Noah stepped closer. That was restrained. Adrian gave a faint, almost tired smile. Restraint is a strategy. People think consequences arrive with shouting. They don't. They arrive with structure. Noah nodded slowly. So the real pressure starts now? Exactly, Adrian said. Once we leave this room, the story moves. We need to make sure it moves in the right direction. They gathered their things, heading toward the private exit. As they stepped into the dim hallway beyond the lounge, the sound of the terminal returned footsteps, muffled conversations, the rolling echo of luggage wheels. Adrian walked steadily, his satchel in one hand. Each step felt like part of a longer journey that had started long before this flight. What happened today was simply another piece of evidence, another moment proving the work was far from finished. They passed a large window overlooking the tarmac. The plane they had just left sat in the fading light, its metallic skin reflecting the glow of the terminal lights. Adrian paused for a brief second, taking it in. The aircraft looked serene from this distance, as though it had carried nothing more than ordinary passengers and polite conversation. But he knew better. "Tomorrow," Adrian said quietly, "we begin the part no one sees." Noah didn't ask what he meant. He already knew. Morning light poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Aurora Jetline's corporate conference room. The skyline of Chicago stretched beyond the glass, the lake a shimmering sheet of silver in the distance. Adrian sat at the head of the table, his notebook open in front of him, the pages from yesterday's flight still fresh in his mind. Noah stood at the side, scanning his tablet. A quiet hum from the air conditioning filled the silence between them. On the far side of the room, a single chair sat waiting. It was deliberately placed opposite Adrian, a position that forced whoever sat in it to meet his eyes directly. The door opened. Rachel Meyer entered, her uniform perfectly pressed, her hair pulled into a tight bun. She walked in with measured steps, but there was a tension in her posture that betrayed she knew this was no ordinary meeting. "Ms. Meyer," Adrian said, his voice calm but unyielding. "Have a seat." She took the chair opposite him, setting her hands on the table. "Mr. Cole, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you directly." "This isn't about opportunity," Adrian said evenly. "It's about clarity. I'm going to ask you direct questions, and I expect direct answers." Rachel nodded, though her eyes flickered briefly toward Noah before returning to Adrian. "Yesterday," Adrian began, "before boarding was complete, you approached me in 3A and told me I was in the wrong seat. You had the manifest in your hand. My name was printed on it. Why did you question my presence there?" Her fingers tightened slightly against the tabletop. There was confusion with another passenger, a last-minute seat change request. I wanted to make sure the seating was correct. Adrian leaned forward slightly, his voice still measured. "That's not what you said at the time. You didn't ask to verify the seating. You told me to move, without asking my name, without checking my boarding pass. You assumed I did not belong in that seat." Rachel's jaw tightened. "I didn't mean anything by it. I was trying to resolve the issue quickly. Intent," Adrian said quietly, "does not erase impact. Do you understand that?" She hesitated. "I suppose so." "You suppose?" His voice was still calm, but sharper now. "Ms. Meyer, you've been with this airline for 15 years. You've worked first class for most of them. You know exactly how to verify a seat without escalating a situation. Yet you approached me as though I were trying to take a seat I hadn't earned. That's not a procedural mistake. That's bias." Her lips pressed together, but she didn't look away. "I made a judgment call. Clearly, it was the wrong one." Noah's voice cut in, low but firm. "Judgment calls like that are why we have an audit team, and why this meeting is happening less than 24 hours after the incident." Rachel shifted in her seat. "I've served thousands of passengers. I don't single people out." Adrian let the silence stretch before he spoke again. "Then you shouldn't have a problem explaining why, on this particular flight, your first assumption was that I was in the wrong place." Her voice dropped slightly. "It was a mistake. I'm not proud of it." Adrian studied her for a long moment. "What concerns me most is that, if I had been someone without my position or resources, this would have ended very differently. And I suspect this isn't the first time something like this has happened. It's just the first time the passenger could hold you accountable." Rachel opened her mouth, then closed it again. The truth of his words hung in the air. "You have a choice, Ms. Meyer." Adrian continued, You can try to defend what happened, or you can acknowledge it fully and use it to change. Only one of those choices will allow you to stay in this company. Her shoulders straightened, though her eyes showed the weight of the moment. I acknowledge it. Fully. I should have approached you with respect, the way I do with any passenger. I didn't, and I understand why that's unacceptable. Adrian nodded once, closing his notebook. That's a start. But words are only the beginning. You'll be placed on administrative leave while the audit is completed. You'll undergo retraining before you return to any cabin. If the audit reveals similar complaints from past flights, your employment here will end. Rachel's voice was quieter now. Understood. Adrian stood, signaling the meeting was over. You may go. Someone from HR will brief you on the next steps. She rose, hesitated for just a second, then walked to the door. The sound of it closing was soft but final. Noah exhaled slowly. She's going to think about this one for a long time. She should, Adrian said. If she doesn't, then we failed. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation still lingering. Then Adrian opened his notebook again, writing a single line. Accountability begins when excuses end. Noah glanced at the words but said nothing. A knock came at the door. One of the airport managers from the night before stepped inside. Sir, Captain Park has sent his report. It's waiting in your inbox. He's also requested a follow-up call. Adrian nodded. Set it up for this afternoon. The manager left, and the room fell quiet again. Adrian closed the notebook and looked out the window at the city below. The sun had climbed higher, casting long reflections across the lake. This isn't just about one flight, he said, almost to himself. It's about what happens when the wrong assumptions go unchallenged for years. Noah folded his arms. Then I guess today's the start of the challenge. Adrian turned back to him, a faint but resolute expression on his face. No, today's the start of the change. The boardroom at Aurora Jetline's headquarters was a study in quiet power. Polished oak walls framed a long table where 12 seats waited, each with a neatly stacked agenda and a small glass of water. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city skyline. But today, no one seemed interested in the view. Adrian stood at the head of the table, his satchel placed neatly on the chair beside him. Noah sat to his right, ready with a tablet full of notes and prepared statements. At the far end, the board members murmured in low voices, their expressions a blend of curiosity and caution. When the room settled, Adrian began. Yesterday, on Flight 407 from Dallas to Chicago, I was removed from my assigned seat by a member of our crew without verification of my ticket or my identity. The reason given was a seating error. The reality was bias. A few board members shifted in their chairs. Adrian's tone was calm, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. I am not here to relive the incident for its own sake. I am here to make sure it never happens again, not to me, not to any passenger, not on any Aurora Jetlines aircraft. He opened his notebook, flipping to a page with a bold heading, Skyline Protocol. This is the reform plan. He continued, effective immediately. We are implementing a 3-tier accountability system for all passenger-facing staff. He began to outline the tiers. Tier 1, mandatory ethics and bias training for all crew members, regardless of rank or tenure. Completion is required for continued employment. Tier 2, the introduction of an anonymous passenger reporting system accessible via our mobile app and in-flight entertainment screens. Reports will be routed directly to a centralized audit team, not to the crew on board. Tier 3, immediate recognition for crew members who demonstrate corrective action in the moment. Positive accountability is as important as corrective accountability. People like Maya Torres, who chose to verify rather than assume, will be rewarded and promoted. Noah slid printed copies of the Skyline Protocol down the table. Pages whispered as board members began flipping through them. Adrian continued. Additionally, we will conduct a 12-month review of all recorded crew-to-passenger interactions. Patterns of bias, whether intentional or unconscious, will be addressed directly. We will not wait for viral videos or passenger complaints to prompt change. A hand rose at the far end of the table. It was Marjorie Chen, a long-serving board member with a reputation for challenging proposals. Adrian, this is a sweeping change. You're talking about resources, staffing, retraining. The unions will push back. The cost will be significant. Adrian met her gaze without hesitation. The cost of inaction is higher. Every time an incident like this happens, we lose trust. And once trust is gone, you cannot buy it back. Not with marketing, not with apologies, only with proof. Marjorie held his eyes for a moment, then lowered her hand. Another board member, Thomas Ray, leaned forward. And what about the crew member from yesterday, Rachel Meyer, is on administrative leave pending the results of the audit? Adrian said, if the audit reveals a pattern of similar conduct, her employment will be terminated. If not, she will return after completing retraining. This is not about punishment for its own sake. It is about accountability. Noah tapped the table lightly. And to be clear, the protocol applies to everyone. Every captain, every flight attendant, every gate agent. The room was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city moved as it always did. Taxis crossing intersections, pedestrians rushing along sidewalks, life unfolding far below. Inside, it felt as though the air had thickened with the weight of change. Adrian closed his notebook and rested his hands on the table. I want Aurora Jet Lines to be known for two things: safety and respect. We have always delivered on the first. Starting now, we will deliver on the second with the same discipline, the same urgency, and the same zero tolerance for failure. No one spoke. The silence was not resistance. It was the pause that comes when people realize they are witnessing a pivot, a shift in direction that will ripple far beyond the walls they are sitting in. Adrian nodded to Noah, who began distributing a second document. This, Noah said, is the internal communication to all staff. It goes out today. It explains the Skyline Protocol, the reason for its creation, and the expectation that every employee will uphold it. It also states that our CEO was the passenger involved in yesterday's incident. We are not hiding from the truth. That drew a murmur from the room. Adrian's voice was steady. If we are going to change our culture, it starts with transparency. Pretending this did not happen would be the same as condoning it. He let the words settle, then added, the press will hear about this. When they do, they will see that we are not scrambling to respond. We are leading the conversation, and that is how we will win back the trust that was tested yesterday. The meeting ended with no applause. No grand gestures, only the quiet scrape of chairs as the board members rose. Some lingered to shake Adrian's hand. Others left quickly, already thinking about the logistics of what had just been agreed to. When the room was empty except for Adrian and Noah, they stood by the window, looking out over the city. You think they're ready for what's coming? Noah asked. They don't have to be ready, Adrian said. They just have to be committed. Below them, a plane took off, its silver fuselage catching the sunlight as it climbed into the sky. Adrian watched it until it was a speck against the blue. then turned away. Book me on a flight next week. Random route. Random crew. Noah smiled faintly. Testing the protocol. Testing the culture. Adrian said, "That's the real flight plan now." As they left the boardroom, the hallway felt different. Not lighter change never felt light at the start, but charged with the possibility that the next flight, and the one after that, might carry more than passengers. They might carry proof that respect could be built into every takeoff, every landing, every moment in between. In the space of a few hours, one quiet confrontation became a catalyst for change. Adrian Cole didn't just reclaim his seat, he redefined the rules of the entire airline. He proved that real power doesn't always need a raised voice or public outrage. Sometimes it moves in silence. Sometimes it works behind closed doors, turning a personal insult into structural reform. But his story is also a mirror forcing us to ask how many moments like this go unseen, because the passenger doesn't have the power to fight back. How many people have been made to feel small, invisible, or out of place, simply because of who they are? Prejudice doesn't always wear a name tag. Sometimes it hides in a glance, a tone, or a mistake that somehow happens to the same kinds of people again and again. And until we face it, it will keep boarding our flights, sitting in our offices, and walking our streets. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, if it made you hopeful, don't let it end here. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that demand we see, feel, and change.